This month's SBE Webxtra is brought to you by Wheatstone, maker of the intelligent IP audio network used by studios around the globe. The AES-67 compatible WheatNet IP intelligent network is the most comprehensive end-to-end studio network system in the world, with a full line of consoles, software apps, IP audio appliances, and third-party add-ons for any studio workflow, size, or purpose. Wheatstone. Well, good afternoon. I'm Chris Scherer, Member Communications Director of the Society of Broadcast Engineers and the co-host of this month's episode of the SBE Webxtra, the SBE chapter of the web. This is a monthly SBE meeting that's usually held on the third Monday of the month. The SBE is the Association for Broadcast and Multimedia Technology Professionals with about 5,000 members, mostly in the U.S., but also around the world. And the host of today's SBE Webxtra is once again SBE board member Kirk Harnack, who's also the chair of the SBE Social Networking Committee. Hey, Kirk, how you doing?
Hey, I'm good, Chris. Thank you very much for that nice intro. We have got a wonderful show for you today. A good topic, and not that it's been covered a lot, but now that we have some distance between now and the beginning of remote operations, at-home operations, outside office operations for a lot of broadcasters, radio and TV broadcasters. We're going to be talking about that topic from someone who's been involved with a lot of it, and that's Kevin Trueblood. We'll be introducing Kevin in just a few minutes, but first, I want to give it back to Chris. Chris, you have some announcements that we always do at the front of just about every SBE meeting, and this is no exception.
Yes, we do. We have your SBE member update for today, June 15, 2020. The SBE membership year runs from April 1 to March 31, and if you have already renewed your SBE membership, we certainly thank you. If you have not yet renewed, the grace period is about to end, so don't risk losing your member benefits. You can renew online today. Just go to sbe.org and click on the Renew Membership corner button up in the upper right corner of the website. The 2020 SBE compensation survey data is being reviewed right now. If you participated over the previous, I think it was about 6 weeks, we certainly appreciate that, but keep an eye out. We'll send an email. It'll be mentioned in some of our usual communication methods to let you know that the survey results are ready and all SBE members can access that data as part of your membership. Also, the SBE Awards Program nomination deadline is today. Today is June 15. If there are any people you think are worthy of the honor, chapters or members, please nominate them right away, because like I said, the deadline's today. Go to sbe.org/awards and submit your nomination. We have several webinars by SBE on the calendar. Well, actually, I have one to mention right now, at least, on June 18th. So a couple of days away, we present AOIP Module 4, Audio Codecs for Broadcast Applications. This webinar will cover the foundations of IP audio transport over a LAN or WAN, and the keys to reliable audio transport for broadcast critical applications. There are more webinars in the works, and just check the SBE website for those and what's coming up. Go to sbe.org/webinars for all the details. The SBE also, once again, will present the Leadership Development course. This is going to be held August 4 to 6 in Atlanta. You can learn more and register to attend at sbe.org/LDC. The SBE has presented the course since 1997. Rodney Vanderveer, a professor of organizational leadership and supervision at Purdue University, brings more than 30 years of industrial and business experience in management positions in human resources, training and development, and manufacturing. Register with the SBE's No Worry Guarantee. If the course has to be canceled due to the COVID-19 pandemic, 100% of your paid registration fee will be refunded. Our no-go decision will be made no later than July 1st. If you plan to travel by air to get there, we suggest you wait to make your travel plans until just after July 1 to be safe. On the certification side, if you want to take an SBE certification exam, here are some dates to put down. Local exams will be held at chapters the week of August 7. The application deadline is already passed for that, but the next local exam opportunity is in November. Submit your application for the November exams by September 21st. If a local chapter exam is not convenient for you, private proctoring is available. Contact the SBE National Office for details. And for more information on SBE certification, go to sbe.org/certification. And that's your SBE member update for June 15th, 2020. Kirk.
Chris, I want to mention one more thing about membership in SBE, and I recently received the senior member upgrade. Chris, I think you brought this to my attention, and I really appreciate you doing that.
I did. Actually, I've mentioned it to a few people. If you are, oh boy, you're going to get me on the spot. I should have pulled this up.
Actually, I've got it right here in front of me. 5 years of consecutive membership, and at least 15. It's okay. I had to look it up myself. And at least 15 years of active participation in broadcast engineering or allied fields, demonstrated professional responsibility in one of several leadership roles. If those are true, you can apply for an upgrade to senior membership at no charge. There's a PDF application on the website. And we'll be glad to put that in the show notes, or you can Google SBE.org senior member, and it will lead you to that member. It's an upgrade. The membership upgrade is what it is.
Correct. And as you said, there is no charge. As long as you meet the criteria, you can apply to become a senior member of the SBE. Go to the membership details page, and it's up there as well. So thanks for bringing that to everyone's attention as well, Kirk.
Do I get to the front of the buffet line with this, or coffee discounts?
Yes, you get a Laurel and hearty handshake.
I love that. A Laurel and hearty handshake. I'll take the hearty part. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Chris. So today we're talking with a broadcast professional who, well, let's just introduce him right now, and then we'll tell you what we're talking about. Kevin Trueblood. Kevin is the Associate General Manager of Technology and Operations at WGCU Public Media. And Kevin's no stranger to the show. He's been on before, and he's also been the interviewer on the show. Kevin, welcome in to the SBE Webxtra.
Hey, thanks. I feel like we've come full circle because when all of this social distancing started, I was the guest on this show, and now we're a few months into it talking about the impacts of that social distancing. So I feel like we're coming full circle on this.
And who better to circle back to than you from at the beginning of it, and now we're not that we're at the end of it, but we have some distance between the beginning of it and now. And I think there's some things we know now that maybe we wish we would have known then, or things that we have been able to confirm, that we've been able to predict and guess and see how it's all gonna work out. So again, welcome into the SBE Webxtra. It's Kirk Harnack here along with Kevin Trueblood. And so Kevin, we are a number of weeks, actually a number of months into social distancing operations, and we've all seen how it's affected, well, on TV. We've seen how it's affected local newscasts. Sometimes we see a newscast, depending on how the TV station does it, just one person on the set, the news set or the newsroom. Sometimes we see two, but they're far apart. They're in the weather and sports positions with the anchor positions empty. In some television stations, we do see a traffic person over in the traffic center, but nobody else. I happen to occasionally have filled in over at a TV station here in Nashville doing weather, where the weather set and the traffic set and the news set in their new studios are way far apart. It's cavernous in there. And so they're able to put people in each of those positions as long as the news anchors are far apart. But many places are also putting people at home. I know of several TV weather people who set up a green screen at home, set up remote connectivity to the graphics computers at the TV station, and then they're using various technologies to get that signal back. And so with all that preamble, we also have the radio business I'm more involved in, doing a lot of things from home. And some people went for that whole hog. Other people haven't really had to. But Kevin, I'm not sure where you want to start, but wherever you'd like to start about commenting on this, and then we'll get into some of the technologies and the procedures and what people have found over the past couple of months. What do you think?
Yeah, and that's a good way to start, because I feel like it's every single station has kind of handled it in very different ways, because in a lot of ways, we've all been in the same boat of trying to, or at least in the same seas of trying to navigate how to do this based on our comfort levels, based on our equipment capabilities, based on just whatever the status is of your local area as far as outbreak. But it really has been unique to every TV station in particular and radio station to how they're handling it. Because all the people that I've talked to, it really runs the gamut of some are 100% remote. They've got all their anchors at home. Some are, like you said, they're on different ends of the set or doing mix and match. Some are at home, some are on the set. And others are just, yep, we're all in the building and we just keep on like nothing's different. I've talked to people that run the whole spectrum. And for us, at least from my comfort level, I can describe, like, for instance, my master control supervisor, when we all hit the eject button on our building and decided to all work remotely, my master control supervisor was just really nervous because his comfort level was such that he could handle everything in the building just fine. But as far as remoting into everything, he was a little more apprehensive. He was a little more anxious about doing that. But about a week into it, once he realized that he was able to do all the things he needed to do, and we really weren't missing a whole lot of responsibilities or details on the air, we ran for the better part of 2 months completely remotely, and everything was fine. It just kind of, we just kind of needed to overcome that anxiety, that apprehension about actually doing it remotely and just get there. So every station, I think, like I said, has been just different. We have run the full spectrum of who's doing what.
Now, you're involved in both radio and television at WGCU Public Media, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, we've got both the public television station and the public radio station for Southwest Florida.
Have you, what differences have you found? There's the obvious. Radio usually seems simpler because you got an audio path to and from, and a lot of times you've got some remote control that you need to have of an automation system or a mixing system or both. Television seems a bit more complex. There's generally more people involved in a production of television. What have you found to be some of the key differences in getting those two situations working well from people's homes?
Well, just the sheer number of people involved and all the coordination that needs to happen as a result. Because, for a radio show, like, for instance, a morning show, you've got a duo. And this morning, in fact, I was at a commercial station where the host was in the studio, the co-host was at home, and that's how they've been operating for a few months. Worked just fine. But if you've got a television production, all right, you've got a talent in the studio, but you also need to have a technical director. You need to have producers. You need to have people that are running the prompter. You need to have people doing the audio. And everybody's kind of at various stages. Some people are able to put enough distance in the control room where everybody can work safely. Other people, they're remoting it. So you can have the prompter person working at home. You can have the audio person running a virtual mixer if you've got that capability. You've got a technical director that can punch buttons remotely as long as he can see his multi-viewer remotely. And everybody can kind of collaborate. But the key is you have to have so many people on the same page. You have to have, whereas everybody's usually in the same room, they've got the IFBs in, they can all hear each other and they can all yell at each other. Now you have to figure out how to be able to talk to everybody because there are so many moving parts and it's all very rapidly changing. That's what we love about television production. You've been there as a weather person to be able to, somebody's got to give you the command, somebody's got to roll the tape and do all the things. It's just, there's a lot more moving parts.
One of the things that I noticed, or I saw a lot of Facebook postings and other professional forum postings when we started working from home, when television stations started working from home, it seems that a lot of TV stations were putting to use their various live remote systems like LiveView or Dejero or others like that. And I was kind of a little concerned. Sometimes they'd be sending out a camera operator, a remote operator, to an anchor person's or weather person's, sports person's home. And I even saw one picture where when there was some real concern about COVID, the photographer was on the front porch with the camera shooting through the front window and the remote gear outside and probably the truck outside. And the talent was in the home doing their part, I guess a wireless mic in between. Now, that seemed a little over the top, but okay, I get it. And my concern was, boy, I wonder if these TV stations are really racking up big data bills with services like LiveView, Dejero, or if they pay their carriers, their wireless carriers directly, if they were doing a lot more hours of remotes. I did some checking here in my market, in the Nashville market, talked to two directors of engineering for two TV stations here, and they both tell me that that's not been the case, that they may have had some initial remotes done with their mobile wireless remote packs, but pretty quickly they got onto the internet service at the anchor persons, at the weather persons, at the reporters' homes. So they're just using bandwidth that was probably there already. In some cases, some anchors or some people working from home have opted for better internet than they had before, higher speed. And so, Kevin, what's been your, what have you seen in regard to the usage of bandwidth? It's pretty well taken care of itself at this point.
I think there's been a big shift, like you said, of using the home internet services, but the number one obstacle, and this is, I know in one particular case of a TV station, that they had so many problems with connectivity that's one of the reasons why they all just decided to go back to the studio, because everybody's internet can be different. If all you have available, if you live in a semi-rural area and all you've got is a slow DSL service, well, that's not really good for live video. So that's been, I think, the biggest discrepancy that they've had, and one of the biggest challenges to particularly the talent working remotely is the internet bandwidth, because you have to have that high-speed internet, a good bandwidth in order for the video to come through. But if all you're doing is just control, if you're just running a remote desktop session, or if you're running VNC, you can have slow internet. It doesn't depend on that. So it just kind of depends on whose roles are doing what.
The other interesting thing, and we talked about this in our pre-show meeting, is delay. Because video tends to involve delay, although the various consumer-oriented services like Zoom or Google Meet, the Microsoft's offering, also even Skype, they do try hard to keep the delay down. But I know that if you're using a true wireless multi-carrier remote setup that we so often see for live on the scene reporting, there can be some real delay here. You know, that's when you have the problem where the anchor says, let's go out now to Brittany at the scene of the accident, and Brittany's standing there doing like this, and then finally she says, thanks, Bob. Yes, the accident's really terrible. And of course, back to you's not a big problem because the anchor sees that right away, but it takes a while for the remote reporter to get that. Even though with high-speed internet and those connections, we still do see reporters and anchors and weather people not being able to have quite the banter, the quick banter back and forth that we used to be able to. In fact, even you and me, Kevin, on this webcast, there's a fair amount of delay between you and I. And so it's hard to have quick banter. And I think the good anchors, people who are understanding of this, are adjusting their flow, their speaking flow. What are you seeing in regard to this to avoid that pregnant pause, stepping on each other, not knowing if the other person was done yet or not, speaking, then realize the other person was speaking while you're speaking, and all that mess? Are people adjusting?
Well, I think we've all had a sense of that because we've all been on a billion Zoom meetings over the last few months. And when you try and get 10 people that try and talk over each other, half your meeting ends up being, no, wait. Okay. Go ahead. No. So you have a lot of that across the board, but I've seen that too. And there definitely is a difference if there's a lot of delay, where different talents have kind of adjusted to be different. So some will ask an open-ended question, let the guest come in and just kind of let that breathe in between their pauses so that they're not stepping all over each other. But then some of them just don't care. They just let it go, just let each other step all over each other. But as a viewer, that's uncomfortable to see. It's like, no, I want to see this person talk. I want to hear what they have to say. Please don't talk all over each other. But of course, there's always been that issue too with satellite latency, but there's, that's been a lot minimal than the web encoding that we've seen. But obviously the biggest difference is if you've got a better picture, you're going to have more delay. If you're going to have less delay, you're going to have a crummier picture. So there's a whole lot of sacrifice that's involved, a whole lot of compromising.
Something I noticed in the TV news business, at least this was true at some TV stations that I worked at, was when TV stations went to production automation, so news automation, and so your entire newscast was already built in the camera shots, the over the shoulders, the lower thirds, and even the switching of the audio. And we at TV station I was at the time, we really lost the ability to be sure that if we want to have some anchor weather person banter, that our mics would still be on. And in fact, at least at first anyway, that wasn't assured. And so we got used to not being able to banter. And I think the graphics departments at many TV stations decided, hey, let's do a swoosh between the anchor handing off to the weather person and the weather person beginning. So we had a pretty definite swoosh, and graphics to kind of indicate anchor, you're done, weather person, you're on. And it reduced the banter, for good or bad. It reduced the amount of banter. Well, so now we have less banter anyway. At least you may have a different experience of where you work, but we had less banter. I'm not saying that made it worse. It just made it a little bit different. And that has resulted in an automatic way of dealing with this delay, because we have the swoosh and we start, and we really don't chit chat back and forth between, unless we know that it's going to turn out okay. Have you noticed anything like what I'm noticing, or am I off base here?
Well, no, I think there's always been a little bit of that, but now it's just more exaggerated because we've been used to having people on different parts of the sets and things like that. Like I said, I think it just depends on where you are, the different location, and how they've adapted the times. A lot of these newscasts, they research every single tidbit of every single newscast that they do, and the consultants will tell them, have 2 minutes of banter, and maybe some of them had a consultant that told them not to do it anymore. So they've been, doing just kind of going with whatever works best in their situation.
Speaking back to costs for a minute, the people who I interviewed here in the Nashville market indicated that they really hadn't had any increased connectivity costs, but they did have to buy some new laptops because their anchors may not have, they would provide a desktop computer at the station, but nobody's in the station. So TV stations, at least in my market, ended up supplying some brand new laptops to their talent out in the field. Did you experience any of this?
That is an excellent point, and something I was going to talk later on about. That is, for best practices, we have been migrating towards laptops for exactly that reason, because having a laptop is the only way that you have the option of either staying or going and having access to everything the same, whether you're in the office or whether you're remote. Especially if you're able to just VPN, and all of your shortcuts, all of your map drives, all of that stuff still exists. So your machine doesn't know if it's in the building or not. And to the end user, their productivity doesn't change whether they're in the building or not, because everything's the same for them on their computer. So that, I know, in the corporate world, has been a standard. And I know that that's starting to move over to broadcast too, that, yeah, it's a little more expensive to buy a laptop than a desktop in some cases, but for productivity purposes, it makes a whole lot more sense, because somebody's able to do a lot of the same things that they can at their desk that they can at home. So now, I think it makes a lot of sense for everybody to standardize on just buying laptops and a docking station, and your end user is going to be able to do whatever they need to do wherever they are.
So one TV engineer in my market said, we really haven't decided how long-term these operations may be, but yes, I do think we'll embrace some remote operations going forward on a permanent basis. Right now, we're just trying to get through the pandemic, keep everyone distant, while remaining committed to good journalism and remote acquisition. Clearly, if we can do it and it enables more content or a more attractive staffing option, then there might be a reason to continue. Probably, let's see. Yeah. So, that prefaces my next question. Where do you think we're going in terms of how many changes, how many things we're doing now may become permanent?
That is the $1 million question. And I think we're all starting to see this unfold as time goes on. Exactly. Because, for some of us, as much as I love I love working at home. I haven't really missed a lot. I do miss being in the office, and I do miss the human interaction as somebody who's very extroverted. I love my wife, but sometimes it's nice to interact with people besides her. But but we are kind of facing this idea that maybe there are some productivity things that we can do that can not just allow us to work remotely, but increase productivity. Like I said, buying laptops is a big one, so that, again, you can take it back and forth to the office and have the same tools. But I think what we are seeing, and the radio world already saw this a great deal, but TV was a little more, TV may or may not adopt some of these, at least the way I see it, is, embracing more remote talent. With radio, for me personally, I was on the air in 3 different markets in Illinois, and from my house here in Florida, and I was able to record things, drop them in, and they would air moments after I transferred them there. And to the listener, they had no idea I was in Florida. I could read a lot of the same things that I could if I was there, a lot of the same Twitter feeds, bulletins, news, things like that are happening in the community. I can do all that from here. Nobody knew that I was actually in Florida. I could interact with people through Facebook Messenger or whatever. And for television now that we're embracing this idea of remote work, I think there is the idea that, maybe our prompter operator can be in another state. Maybe a master control operator can be somewhere else, not necessarily in the building, even though it's nice to have them there. But if you're looking at master control as just doing quality control and doing program ingestion and things like that, there's a lot of resources you can do that are remote. We did that here for the better part of 2 months, where we didn't have one person in the building until we started bringing people back kind of on a staggered schedule. But there wasn't much that we missed. And so if I'm able to do that, well, maybe I could have an operator that's, in Atlanta, or maybe I could have, a production staffer that isn't here, because the connectivity, if we have connectivity, if we have the resources, if we're all able to communicate, why wouldn't that work? And maybe that's something that, particularly as we're seeing, unfortunately, we're seeing furloughs, we're seeing reductions in staff, and I certainly don't want to advocate for that by any means. It's terrible to see the numbers of staffing go down, but we are dealing with smaller staffs, and if we need to start adapting, then maybe that's a way that we can start helping each other, that, we can do shifts in different markets and things like that, and things like this may be possible. Or it can be something that if you have somebody that's maybe not as physically able to travel, they can do things that they can do things remotely. So you have some options there for people that may not have been able to help you initially.
We're talking with Kevin Trueblood. Kevin is the Associate General Manager for Technology and Operations at WGCU Public Media in the Fort Myers, Florida area. I'm Kirk Harnack, and we're going to take a quick break and turn it back over to Chris shortly. But when we come back, I've got a couple more interesting things to talk about. One of them is it time to think about differences in studio transmitter links? What about cloud infrastructure? There's a little bit of this going on now, and I think people are really looking toward that, where you don't necessarily even need a central studio. Certainly, there's been movements in master control operations and consolidated switching. And then we're going to ask Kevin this really interesting question: has this been a good time for this to happen? That's going to be coming up in a few minutes. Chris Scherer, back to you.
Very good. Well, the SBE Webxtra is made possible by the generous support of our sponsor, Wheatstone. We thank them, and the SBE Webxtra will be right back.
Hello, I'm Jay with Wheatstone Corporation, and on behalf of the entire company, we want to thank you for all your support during these difficult times. And even though that we missed NAB 2020, our team has been working to meet their commitments and bring you some very cool products for 2020. So we'll have a whole new series of blades, which we're calling Blade 4, gobs of AES 67, NMOS, all the features you've been asking for over the last few years. Audio arts, we have a whole new little family of talent stations for mid and small markets, for headphone amplifiers. On the console side, we have GSX. This is a new Wheatstone control surface that we'll be launching in the next few weeks. And finally, on the virtual side of things, we've got virtual processing, remote mixing, and codec stuff. We've also got radio stations in the cloud. First of all, we want to say thank you to our customers, because we couldn't do this without you. And if you need anything, Team Wheat's here 24/7, 365 days a year. Thank you.
By watching this webcast, you earned 1/2 of an SBE recertification point in category G when you recertify, something to keep in mind. I'm going to throw this in, Kirk. We're talking about remote connectivity during the lockdowns and whatnot. In the June issue of The Signal, which should have been delivered to your mailbox by now, if you go to, what page is it? Page 16. We actually kind of talked a little bit about this in the engineering perspective. Got 2 viewpoints from Sam Wallington from the Educational Media Foundation and Joe Portelli, who's a contract engineer. They have 2 different points of view on what they did to accommodate having to work remotely. So there's even some more relevant information there as well. So Kirk, Kevin, back to you.
There's so much good information out there and so many good ideas. And so I wish I could be the person to consolidate all that and bring it to you. But man, I saw that. I haven't read it yet. In fact, I think I've got that issue sitting in my backpack for the next time I'm out and about and have a little bit of time to sit down with a cool drink and a read. So I'm Kirk Harnack.
Tell me when
Kevin
you find that time.
Yeah, exactly. That's why it hasn't gotten read yet. Kevin Trueblood is along with us. He's with WGCU Public Media. And so, Kevin, a couple questions come to mind. Well, I guess the first one, I'll wait on this one and ask the second one first. And that is about differences in how TV stations may be handling their switching. I've worked at TV stations that did master control for several stations right there on site, on premise. And I've worked at another station where all the master control switching was done in a completely different city. And the only time there was the slightest bit of worry about that, because they had redundant lines in both directions, and it was kind of weird because here's the studio, the transmitter is just a few hundred feet away and the big tower's right there. And yet the signal went, hundreds of miles away and came hundreds of miles back with the commercials added, right? And other master control duties were switched there too. The only time that we'd have, by golly, an engineer on site making sure that nothing was going to fail was during the Super Bowl, because you wanted all of those commercials to make sure they happened no matter what, and a backup server was in place, and it was going to go. And I know TV stations have been doing this for some time. Radio stations have consolidated under same roofs, and in the future there's probably going to be more of that regional and even national consolidation. What do you think stations are looking at speeding this up during this COVID pandemic, making more plans? What do you see, Kevin?
I was just reading that there was, for one major broadcaster, they were going to start remoting some of their hub operations. So as I was understanding it, they were going to be hubbing their hubs. So it was like they had more hubs, and then they were going to consolidate those hubs down into bigger hubs. Yeah. So they were just kind of consolidating the hubs a little bit more. So I think you're going to see more of that. I know for some, at least on the public television side of things, I know there have been, it was a big thing to join one of a couple of master control hubs, and then some stations got into it and didn't like it, or it didn't work out as well as they thought, and then went back to local operations. It really depends. To me, my perspective has always been, I like to have local control, but if you're working for a big company, that's not really a decision you get to make on a local level. At least in my case, we still have a local master control. My ideal scenario is one that this individual station has control, but your talent can be anywhere controlling that locally. Because, again, to me, like hubbing, this may be a hot take, but it's like I said, I think some people figured out that that hubbing things was great on paper, but in practice, there was a lot of issues with it. Like you said, you're piping something 100 miles or a couple hundred miles away to get, piped back. What could possibly go wrong? So, it works well when it works well, but when it doesn't, there's a lot of problems. But I think you're going to, particularly if budgets start to tighten, you're going to start seeing more of these consolidation of hubs and things like that, particularly for the bigger operators. For the public television side of things, again, that's going to be up to each individual member station. In our case, it made sense for us to leave a local master control. Other stations, it makes more sense for them to join a hub. It just depends on, a lot of times, their situation.
As an engineer, I think it's important that other engineers, my fellow engineers, keep an open mind about making things work and making them work more efficiently while always balancing that risk and reward equation. What I was going to ask you about, was this a good time for lockdowns, social distancing, working from home to occur? Kevin, 5 years ago, before I had fiber here at my home, we're getting fiber to a couple of my radio stations in small towns. There's fiber running past my rural radio stations on the highway now, and we'll soon be able to tap into that. Not for free, but we're going to have more and more reliable connectivity. Talk to me about, was this a good time for this to happen?
Oh, I don't think there's ever a good time for it to happen.
Well, no.
But at the same time, I kind of think about if this had happened, like you said, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, I think what we would have seen is more stations that just went, well, we're an essential operation. You're going, we're all going to be at the office. This is what we have to do. These days, it's gotten a lot easier for us to have the tools we need at home. Thankfully, not thanks just in part to great internet connection, but also resources becoming cheaper and easier to get. It's like right now on Amazon, you can't buy a webcam unless it's at least a good webcam.
Well,
because everybody, they're all sold out.
Yeah,
I mean, yeah, you can buy some really crummy ones, but everybody's buying them because everybody's doing, remote meetings these days. And so, and same goes for the USB microphones. The same goes for a lot of the equipment like ring lights and things like that. They're getting hard to find because the tools that we need to do these kinds of jobs are getting cheaper, getting easier to get. And so it makes sense for a lot of people to do it. So, that's why I said when we started thinking about working remotely, I kind of started thinking to myself, like, I don't think there's anything we'll miss in being not here. We can do a lot of the same things remotely. And particularly if you're using, if you're answering email, if you're doing meetings, it's like you're not missing a whole lot, at least on the management level. But the person in the building, obviously for engineering, we still have to be, because we're the ones responsible for making stuff work for the people that are working remotely. But like I said, I think 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, I think there would have been more of a push for people to just be in the building, and we just all would have tried to figure out how to have people work safely that way.
I'm not completely up on all the gear that's available out there, but I gotta believe that companies like Logitech, the camera, the USB camera company, keyboards, mice, that kind of thing. I gotta believe that people like Blackmagic Design and maybe others I think the industry needs a USB connected. I don't want to have to buy a dongle converter to go from one thing to another. It's got to be USB, so it's usable by all these consumer programs in the browser and so forth. But a high quality camera that's USB connected, USB built in, and it has plenty of processing in the camera to make the picture look pretty. And I got to believe there's a market for these things in the $300, $400, $500, $600 range. I think some people are willing to pay plenty more than $100, $120, $80 for, like my camera is a Logitech C920, which you can't get right now, or you can't get for any kind of reasonable price. And I'm a little scared to try these $49 cameras on Amazon that purport to be, just like the Logitech, compared to the Logitech.
Let me put it this way. I tried to buy one of those. It was like $150 on Amazon. It was some name you've never heard of, and it could do 4K and all this stuff. I bought one and it did not work at all. Yeah. I mean, it did not do anything that was advertised, and it ended up going back to Amazon. So you're exactly right. There's a lot of things that say they can do it, but whether or not they can actually do it worthwhile, well, that's another question.
I gotta believe there's better stuff on the way because there's a need for it. I don't want to pay $1,200 for a digital SLR that might overheat. There's options available, but they're not made for the task. I want a not necessarily studio quality, not what you'd pay, $20,000 for in a TV studio, but something better than what I've got. But under $500. That's USB.
Yeah. And actually it's funny you say that because Blackmagic makes their capture or their capture box, the web presenter, which is a fantastic box that takes an SDI or HDMI video and turns it into USB. And I've got a couple of them. They work great. I went to buy another one. It's back ordered for a very long time.
Yeah.
For the same reason, because everybody wants one of those things to work at home. So there are some tools that already exist, and you can buy capture cards. So, I think one of the things I've been keeping my eye on is just a nice little camera, like a camcorder that'll cost a couple $100, and then you can buy an HDMI capture card for that. The thing is, a lot of the things that we are doing now are things that, like, YouTubers, that's standard issue for them. So the people that are doing digital videos, they're doing the vlogs, they're doing the podcasts. These are a lot of the tools they've been using. It's just we're now kind of going, well, maybe we can use those things. And at least now, when we're forced to work remotely and we're trying to adapt, particularly the consumers are willing to accept a grainier video just because it is video. They're craving for fresh content, and that's what us broadcasters are able to provide, albeit at a less quality. But I'm with you. I would love to see a good product range. I'm looking at you, the major producers of equipment, to come out with something great at a reasonable price like that.
And I got to believe that we can end up with equipment at home. I checked my upload and download bandwidth. I'm fortunate. I do have fiber here at my house. It's up to 1 gig fiber. I constantly measure it, and it's usually 680 meg down, 680 meg up. I checked it to a speed server not too far from where this show is being produced right now, in the New York City area. And I had 300 and some meg up to that, and 200 and some meg down from that. So what I'm saying is that's plenty for a 4K picture that is, just reasonably compressed. So the bandwidth is there. How reliable is the bandwidth? No, not 24/7. It's getting more and more. And as consumers watch, more Netflix, as more Zoom meetings are going on, as bandwidth keeps getting used, consumed, desired, these things do just keep getting better and better over time. Just like you said, I'd love for manufacturers to come up with better equipment at prices that look attractive to doing this kind of work from home. I think they're going to sell very, very well when they come out with more things like that. Kevin, I want to mention that this very show right here is being produced and has been, and this network, the GFQ network that's producing our show for us, they've been operating this way for actually years. There's a studio in the New York City area, but this very show right now live is being switched by an operator not in New York. He's in a different city, a suburb far away. And yet he's got complete remote control of everything in the studio in New York, which I think is just amazing that we've been doing this already, and it does work pretty well. Any comments on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny how sometimes that if we look outside our own industry, we kind of see that there are standards and practices that other people have been doing for a long time, that it's like, wait, you guys aren't doing that? And especially when it comes to enterprise IT, that's station. Seems like the broadcast industry was very slow to adopt some of the standards and practices in the IT industry. We're getting there, and a lot of places are right at where they should be. But you're right. I think there's the nice thing is we're getting ideas from anywhere. We're not just trying to look from within and trying to reinvent the wheel. It's like if we step outside into the AV industry, or again, YouTubers are making 4K videos that look fantastic with equipment that we would probably scoff at, but people find acceptable for YouTube.
Yeah. That is indeed true. Chris Scherer, I want to make sure that you get a chance to chime in if you had any questions. A lot of times you are a good sounding board, voice of reason, and you ask the things that we forgot to ask.
Well, you mentioned the fact that the streaming provider is in New York and our operator is in another major metropolitan suburb. You're in Nashville. Kevin's in Fort Myers, Florida. I'm in Kansas City. So we are obviously exemplifying everything we've just been talking about, and have been doing it for a little while as well. Kevin made a good point that we haven't reinvented the wheel, not to diss our own ranks. But of course, for years, broadcasting was kind of the front of all the technology. We were the ones coming up with ways to connect various stations across the country, networks, and making the specification as to how are we going to do this, how are we going to accomplish it. We've kind of become more the user than the innovator in a lot of ways for some of this. And I'm not, again, it's not a strike against broadcast. It's just the rest of the world, I think, is kind of caught up with us technologically, with home use, home recording, home production, home video, the YouTubers, et cetera. It's all kind of come up, and in many ways it has leveled the playing field. So we're one of the major players still.
Yeah. And it does depend on the application, certainly. About a month ago, I watched a video on YouTube about why does this TV camera cost $250,000? And of course, 75% of that was the lens. It was, one of these big Canon lenses on an expensive camera. And if you're going to cover whether it's NASCAR races or football or NBA basketball or golf, oh my goodness, golf, you've got to have some fantastic lenses, stable cameras, well-paid operators who are experienced. So it depends on what's being covered. We could not take Logitech cameras and cover the Masters golf tournament, right?
Right. You're not going to get a quarter of a mile long clean zoom out of the cheap lens, and you're not going to get especially when you zoom, you need the most stable platform you can find. That cheap, your grandpa's tripod is just not going to cut it. It's going to be so wobbly and shaky. It's kind of like looking at the tower cams sometimes. That are up on the tower that aren't really shock mounted too well, and they're just shaking like the dickens when a slight breeze comes by. Kind of makes you seasick, and they have to pull way out and have no zoom at all, or else it's just unusable. Period.
So I would venture to say at the bottom end, bottom to, I'm not even to the medium, but certainly the bottom. I mean, you wouldn't shoot a game show with webcams. I don't think. I mean, not in a traditional studio. They don't have the framing, focusing, zooming capability that people have come to expect. But for talking head shows like this one, this does work out very well for local TV newscasts, for the anchors and other people to make their appearances, for the weather people to do their work against a green screen, or even if they don't have a green screen, they can talk on camera, and then they can cut to the graphics just like that. So there are ways to make television that's not terrible. In fact, in some cases, it's pretty good, using these tools that we have, and some of them are consumer tools. I want to have this conversation again in a few more months or a year from now and see really where we've come. It's going to be interesting to see what practices we've implemented today continue on. I would be remiss if I didn't get to mention my own radio stations in Mississippi, in Hawaii, and in American Samoa. We're operating pretty much like normal. Our sales staffs are not all coming together, but we tend to do a morning show and an evening show in control rooms. And the control room is, except for producing the occasional commercial, the control rooms are not occupied. So we really, at my small town radio stations, haven't had to change our outlook very much. I was at some other radio stations, successful small town radio stations in Kentucky a couple weeks ago, and except the salespeople don't all come together, but the individual station booths, control rooms, are operating about like normal. There's a fair amount of voice tracking and some local. The place is busy in the morning. The rest of the day, it's not so much. So that in that case, radio didn't change too much. But I've talked to other chief engineers in markets where, hey, we have a 4-person morning show. We want to continue that. So we've had to put 2 people who were married anyway at their home, and then put other people in their homes, and just deal with the delay the best that we could to try to still have a good, functional, funny, informative morning show. So it's been challenging for everyone. I'm interested also to see where cloud-based infrastructure is going to go. We don't have enough time to finish talking about that here, and I think it's still a bit early in the game, but there's certainly cloud infrastructure that is coming on strong. Some people are already using it. It's possible to do this in radio. And I think the full set of tools are going to be there within the next year or so. Kevin, do you have any last comments before we go?
No, I actually totally agree with you. I think we're definitely headed that direction. I think there's been already some proof of concepts with being able to put all of your systems in the cloud and to be able to work remotely. And I think as we go, we're going to start figuring out, again, in a few months, what's really going to stick. And particularly if we have to go into lockdowns again, or if we're just getting used to everybody working from home. I know our staff, we've already had people that are like, can I just do this permanently? And maybe some people, it makes sense for them to do that. So it'll be interesting to see how this trend goes, but it's been fascinating to watch our industry adapt to creating live content and even remote content remotely.
Excellent point. Excellent point. Chris, any last comments from you? And then we'll turn it back over to you.
Kevin said the magic word. It's all about the content. If the content is good, the consumer can forgive some of the technical shortcomings to a point. Obviously, if you're delivering music, it's got to sound good, or you're just not going to want to listen. In the case of a video or television type production, depending on the content, they may be a little more forgiving. And consumers today, I think, are a lot more understanding as well, depending on the situation. The more remote, the more instantaneous, spontaneous. Again, we can tolerate a little video glitch here and there more so than we may have thought about in earlier times. So
you mentioned that as long the music needs to sound good, and that brings to mind that in the last few years, we've had digital playout systems for radio stations, and we have digital playout systems at television stations now too. And those things, because they're IP based, they are at least they're able to be put into cloud environments, whether it's private cloud or public cloud. They can be put in those environments. Not much of that yet, but it's coming. And some of these cloud environments have to change their prioritization system. A lot of the cloud environments are task-based, whereas for media, they have to be real-time based. They can't just stop a task and move it somewhere else. They've got a continuous flow. I think I know we'll see a lot more of that. I know that the big services like Google and Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, you're seeing these become much more friendly to real-time continuous media operations. And my point there was that we've had perfect or nearly bit for bit perfect playback of audio and video for a few years now. That'll only continue to get easier, more convenient, and most importantly, cheaper to handle. So we can do this, and we can transport it via IP. We can have redundant paths. We can deliver it to transmitter sites or directly over the web or over the top services. And so quality is, you almost have to work at it these days to have the quality be poor. The high quality is available with off the shelf stuff. Chris?
True.
Yeah.
Well, if that's it, we're getting close to the top of the hour. So once again, Kevin, hey, thanks for joining us, and Kirk and Kevin both. Interesting conversation. Always good to have a couple of pros, even you two, to participate and provide your insight on the current situation that we're all going through at this point. So I'll wrap it up and say thanks to everybody for watching today's episode of the SBE Webxtra. This episode will be available on demand on the SBE YouTube channel. Give us about a day or so to get that together. And by watching this webcast, you earned 1/2 of an SBE recertification point when you recertify. We thank our sponsor, once again, Wheatstone, for supporting the SBE Webxtra. Watch for the announcement of our next installment next month. It's the chapter of the web, the SBE Webxtra. And on behalf of Kirk and Kevin, I'm Chris Scherer, SBE Member Communications Director. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next month.